Welcome to Lesson 212, Introduction to Ratios. Today we're going to talk about how to create ratios and how to write ratios in three different forms. So in our last lesson we talked about making models of ratios, and we got a definition that a ratio is a comparison of two different items. And it can be written as a part to part, or it can be written as a part to whole. Typically what you'll see is part to part. And then we also found out that we can write the ratio in different ways. We can write it using a colon, like this. We can write it in words, or we can write it in fraction form. Any of these ways is acceptable. It's just hard to remember that when you are working with ratios in fraction form, you do not change it. So if the ratio is 5 to 4, a lot of times we like to say, oh, this is equal to 1 1/4. This is not the case. As a fraction, this is true, but as a ratio, you cannot change it to a mixed number because it is not a fraction. It is just written to look like a fraction. Right, so when we look at this picture, we have 3 cats to 4 dogs. So if we're writing the ratio of cats to dogs, it would be 3 to 4, or 3 to 4 in words, or 3 to 4 as a fraction. Right, so it's very important to notice what the question asks first when setting up your ratio. We talked about this before. You have to list what's first, or on top in your ratio. If you do not do so, you have your ratio written backwards, and it could cause you to solve a lot of different problems incorrectly. So when it asks you, write the ratio in 3 different ways. When it says 3 different ways, they're talking about these different forms. So the colon, words, or in fraction form. Later on, we'll talk about equivalent ratios, and when they want 3 equivalent ratios, they will write that. So when it says 3 different ways, they're talking about the different forms, and when it talks about equivalent ratios, that's when they want equivalent ratios. So if we are writing the ratio in 3 different ways of triangles to squares, I know that first I have to list my number of triangles, and then I have to list my number of squares. So now I have to look. Does this have 3 sides? Yes. Is this a 3-sided shape? Yes. Is this 1, 2, 3? Yes. So even though these triangles aren't the same, they're all triangles still. So this is still considered a triangle. It's just not an equilateral triangle like the other two. So in this case, I have 3 triangles to 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So the first way I can write it is 3 to 4. Then I can write it as 3. And when you write it in words, you need to write everything in words. So the numbers and everything. So 3 to 4, or you can write it as 3 to 4. Right, so for the next problem, it asks you to write the ratio of squares to triangles. The nice thing is you already figured out how many of each you have. Now you just have to flip it. So in this case, when I write the squares to triangles, you'll notice that the 4 comes first because I have 4 squares, and the 3 goes second. These are not the same. Right? This compares triangles to squares. This compares squares to triangles. And then in this case, it would be 4 to 3. And again, 4 to 3. Now, I do not change this to a mixed number because this is not a fraction. It is a ratio. These are what we would consider part-to-part ratios, because this is one whole group right here. All of the shapes are one whole group. Triangles make up part of the group, and squares make up the other part of the group. So this is part-to-part. In this case, we have shapes to triangles. So this is the whole group to part of the group. So now we have to look. I need the number of shapes. Well, all of these are shapes. And I know that I have 3 triangles and 4 squares. So I have 7 total shapes. And I know that I have 3 triangles. So my ratio is 7 to 3. This would be written as 7 to 3. And then again, 7 to 3. Do not change that to a mixed number. It is not a fraction. You cannot change it. And then in this case, again, we're going to do part to whole. We know we have 4 squares making up part of the group. to 7 total shapes in the whole group. So my ratio is 4 to 7. Again, I write it out in words, 4 to 7, and then 4 to 7. Typically when you see a ratio, this is the form that you will see it in, because this automatically makes us think of fractions. So typically you'll see ratios written with the colon. All right, so what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to take a minute. I know that you have these in your notes, and I would like you to try this first one on your own. I would like you to write the ratio of rainbows to 3-leaf clovers in 3 different ways. When you come back, we'll go over your answer. All right, first we have to look at the number of rainbows that we have. Since we have 2 rainbows, I know that 2 has to be written first, and then I always start with the colon. It's just a natural way for me to write ratio, so I always start with that, and then I convert that into the 3 different ways. So I know I have 2 rainbows, and I have 1 3-leaf clover. So my ratio is 2 to 1. We do not put labels with these. In words, I have 2 to 1. In this case, you really need to make sure that you're checking your spelling of 2, since 2 and 2 are spelled differently. And in fraction form, it is written as 2 over 1. And I'm going to have you try this again. Now there are 2 different problems here. First, I'd like you to write the ratio of burgers to chips in 3 different ways. And then I'd like you to write the ratio of chips to burgers in 3 different ways. Now I want you to look here in your notes. This is why it's important to read directions. Here's the first question. You need to answer that with 3 different answers. And then here's the second question. You need to answer that with 3 different answers. And I will tell you right now, if you come up with the same looking answers here, it'll be incorrect. All right, so when we look at writing the ratio of burgers to chips, I first have to look at the number of burgers, since that's listed first, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4, 2, and then I look at the number of chips, since that is labeled second, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So my ratio is 4 to 7. Then I can also write it in words, 4 to 7. And then I also have to write it in the third form, which is in fraction form, which is 4 to 7. Right, the next question asks us to write the ratio of chips to burgers. So then first I have to count the number of chips, and I know that there are 7 chips, and then I have to count the number of burgers, and there are 4 burgers. So you'll notice here, and I'll do the chips in red, and the burgers in black. So in this case, I had 7, 7, and it was listed second because chips was listed second. But now chips are listed first, so 7 has to come first, and 7 has to go on top when I write my answer. Then I know that burgers, in this, on the top one, since it was listed first, I wrote it first. But now down here, it's listed second, so burgers have to go second or on bottom. And then I can also write it in words. So first would be the chips, which is in red, which are 7. And then I know that I have 4 hamburgers. All right. So I'm going to give you one more problem here to try on your own, and that we can practice together, and then we will take some time and go over that answer. Once we are done with that, you'll have a couple problems to try on your own for class tomorrow. So all the ones we did before were pictures. Now in this case, we're using a word problem. So Aurora works at an animal shelter. On Tuesday, the shelter took in 5 stray cats and 7 stray puppies. What is the ratio of puppies to cats for Tuesday? Write the ratio 3 different ways. So it's important to look at the important part of the questions. Of course, we always know that the question, and we'll try that again, the question is always important to hold on to. Is it important that Aurora works at an animal shelter? Not for the purpose of the question. Is it important that on Tuesday they took the number of animals in? Not in this case. All that's important is it's 5 stray cats and 7 stray puppies. So now we need to look here, and I'm actually going to highlight 7 stray puppies in blue, and I know that I need to go puppies to, let's do yellow here. Puppies to cats. So if I'm looking at my highlighted colors, then I know it has to go blue to yellow. Right, so it's just the same as when you do this with pictures, except for now you're actually reading the problem. In the problem, it listed cats first, then puppies, but the question asked us for puppies to cats. So you need to be very careful and read the problems very carefully. So if I look at this, I know that I need to look at the number of puppies first, which was 7, 2, and then I have to look at the number of cats, which was 5. So my ratio is 7 to 5. Then it says I need to write it 3 different ways. So I've written it with the colon. Now I'm going to write it as a fraction. So it's 7 to 5. And then I'm going to write it in words. So first I need to write the number of puppies, which is 7. And then I write the number of cats, which was 5. So all 3 of these answers are the same, they just look different. And again, make sure to read the problem carefully. Don't just assume that whatever's listed first in the problem is going to be listed first in your ratio. All right, so moving right along here, I have 2 problems that I would like for you to try on your own. I would like you to write the ratio of ladybugs to butterflies in 3 ways. And I would like you to answer this word problem down at the bottom and to write the ratio in 3 different ways. You'll notice that you have space on your notes to work this out. And as always, if you have any questions, please be sure to post them to Edmodo so we can go over them in class.